Ladies and gentlemen, to all of you here, please join me in welcoming to the stage Graham Hancock.
Wow. Well, thank you all very much for being here. Thank you for supporting my work. Thank you for reading me. It's a joy and a delight to be with you. I have to confess, I'm feeling quite nervous. I haven't stood on stage for more than 2 years. And the years are passing by and the old brain's getting older. But I shall do my best to convey the message that I have to convey. And what I'm going to talk about tonight is ancient Egypt. My first encounter with ancient Egypt was in 1989. And at that time I was researching a book called The Sign and the Seal, which I'll be talking about further down the line, about the Ark of the Covenant and Ethiopia's claim to possess it. But for a number of reasons that I'll explain in that other talk, I had to go to Egypt, and I found myself in front of the Great Pyramid. And I was just staggered by it. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, and I couldn't believe what the archaeologists were saying about it. They seemed to diminish it. They seemed to want to suck out all the mystery from it, as though archaeologists are kind of vampires, who just want to extract the life from the ancient world. And this huge mystery stands there defying comprehension. It got into my heart, and I knew I had to go back many, many, many times. And Egypt became a central part of my life. I'm calling this talk the message of the first time because I believe that the religion of ancient Egypt is part of an inheritance that was passed around all around the world, actually. And we can find elements of these spiritual ideas in many different parts of the world. And I think they go back to a remote predecessor civilization that passed down a spiritual system. But that spiritual system was perhaps best preserved in ancient Egypt. And the ancient Egyptians had a concept that they called Zep Tepi, which means the first time. And this is set in the remote past. And I will be explaining in detail in my second talk how that all works. On screen at the moment, what we're looking at is obviously the pyramids and an obelisk, and then beside it what's called a pyramidion. And in ancient Egypt, these pyramidions were called benben stones. They actually have a meteoritic origin, which I will go into again in another talk. And they go back to the first time. It was the first object to emerge from the flood. And it was the name given to the capstones of pyramids and the pyramidions. I want to thank my wife, Santha, who has taken all the pictures for this talk and most of the talks that I'll be giving tonight. These photographs were taken in the temple of Seti I in Upper Egypt. Santha's sitting over there. I would long ago have fallen into the abyss if it were not for this wonderful woman by my side, who's kept me on the right path through more than 30 years now, and taught me so many things. She's a genius photographer, and I'm privileged to have worked with her all these years, and I hope we'll have many more years to work together. I'm going to explain all of this in more detail, but the ancient Egyptians were an astronomical civilization. Their focus was on the heavens. And I believe that the first time Zep Tepi can be defined astronomically. And there's a very specific moment. It's not exactly a moment, it's more an epoch of about 1,000+ years, when at dawn on the spring equinox, the lion Sphinx would have gazed directly at its own celestial counterpart, the constellation of Leo. That doesn't happen all the time on the spring equinox, and there's reasons for that, and I'll explain it to you. But in the sky of around 10,500 BC, The Sphinx would have gazed directly at the constellation of Leo at dawn on the spring equinox. And then as the sun rose, something else happens. We see the constellation of Orion crossing the meridian due south of the pyramids. And the three belt stars of Orion are in the same pattern as the pyramids on the ground. And this is where I need to pay tribute to the amazing work of my great friend and colleague Robert Bauval, who is the originator of the Orion correlation theory. I'm going to give you much more detail on this, but I just want to be clear that this is a kind of image of the first time. This is how it looked, how it's defined astronomically. So I want to take you on a journey around the pyramid fields of Egypt, first of all. And we're looking at a map here. I can't use a pointer at the moment, but on that map we can see the beautiful Nile Delta, and we can see Giza, where the Great Pyramids of Giza are, and we can also see Saqqara and Dashur and Maidum. Let's go first to Giza. I'm standing here at a place called Abu Ruash. It's some 6 or 7 miles from the Giza Plateau. And you can see the three great pyramids of Giza behind me in the distance. And coming up closer, Santha took this photograph at the Giza Plateau probably in 1992. And I can't help thinking, I'm looking at those kids in the foreground. What were they? 12, 13 at the time, maybe a bit younger. Now, 30 years have passed. They're in their 40s. The pyramids haven't changed at all. Not at all. We age. We pass through time, but the pyramids do not. They remain. I think there's an Arab saying, man fears time, but time fears the pyramids, or something like that. It's so true. If you look on the map for Saqqara, this is the pyramid of Zoser at Saqqara. It's a step pyramid. And if you accept the conventional chronology, it's a bit older than the Giza pyramids. It's a 3rd dynasty pyramid rather than a 4th dynasty pyramid. Not a bad piece of work, actually, looking at it. And it's incredible inside when you go inside it. Another view of the step pyramid. Round the back of it, there's a little stone sort of chalet and with a hole in it. And inside it sits this figure who, actually the original figure is in the Cairo Museum, but this is supposedly Imhotep, the astronomer and supposed architect of the Pyramid of Zoser. And his eyes are looking up at the sky very appropriately. Another view of the Pyramid of Zoser. In that same complex, but from a different period, there are some very intriguing things. It's at Saqqara that you find the Serapeum. And the Serapeum is an underground labyrinth. It dates from much later, supposedly, than the Pyramid of Zoser. And in this labyrinth are these just enormous sarcophagi, which were used for the burial of bulls, for reasons that I won't go into. But on the right there, you can see the size of them. I'm in there for scale. These are just truly enormous things, and it's an extraordinary mystery as to how they got them into this underground labyrinth in the first place and how they situated them in these alcoves, something that really defies explanation, as many things in Egypt do. Moving on, again, you'll see Dashur on the map. These are the bent and the red pyramids. You can see why the bent one is called bent, because its sides rise at one angle and then it changes angle as it goes up to the top. And then the red pyramid on the right. And they're both attributed to Sneferu, the father of Khufu. Actually, not just 2, but 3 pyramids. There's another one at Maidum that Sneferu supposedly also built. Now, if you're building a pyramid as your tomb, why would you build 3 of them? Does it really support the notion that pyramids are tombs at all? I don't think so. There's the red pyramid, and when we go inside, we find these incredible galleries, really remarkable spaces to spend time in. And there's the bent pyramid, And there's me in front of it with my favorite t-shirt. Stuff just keeps on getting older. I say that because archaeology has a view about the antiquity of civilization, and then new findings keep on coming along which force them to revise that view. And stuff does just keep on getting older as the evidence comes in. And then on the right, we're in one of the corridors, passageways inside that bent pyramid. Extraordinary, tight, limited, very difficult space. I mean, you have to walk down it, you have to be like this. It's really very hard to navigate. And now I'm in front of the Pyramid of Khafra, which is on the left, and the Great Pyramid's on the right. The Great Pyramid is higher than the Pyramid of Khafra, but it's situated on slightly lower ground. So visually, it looks slightly lower than the Pyramid of Khafra. Another thing about the Pyramid of Khafra is that it has some of its facing stones left. You can see them at the top. You have to imagine the Great Pyramid was once completely covered in such facing stones. It just shone brilliantly in the sunlight. It must have been a dazzling spectacle. And we get a sense of it from those few remaining casing stones on the second pyramid. Second pyramid again, playing with the sunrise. And something a lot of people don't notice is the platform on which the second pyramid stands. You can see it here under those camels. This is all man-made. This isn't bedrock. These are all enormous blocks of stone, in some cases weighing more than 100 tons, that were laid into position as a platform for this pyramid. Again, work on a scale that it's really hard to comprehend how it was actually done. In front of the second pyramid here, you're seeing elements of its megalithic mortuary temple, so-called mortuary temple. I believe that these megalithic structures are older than the pyramids, much older, and were co-opted by the pharaohs. And second pyramid again on the left. On the right, the so-called burial chamber inside the second pyramid. No body of any pharaoh has ever been found in any single one of the 100 pyramids in Egypt. And yet we are told that they are tombs. I understand tombs were robbed, but every single one of them? Come on. There's something wrong with that argument. And finally, the third pyramid at Giza, the Pyramid of Ra, smaller than the other two. If we go inside, this is the so-called tomb chamber, again found empty. It's not a very attractive looking place, actually. It's got this kind of arched roof over the top. Doesn't seem very impressive, but let's consider that roof a little bit. Let's look above it, because you can get above it. And you can get above it by it's climbing down through this rock-hewn passage, and then you find yourself on top of those blocks. And that's what it looks like on top. But the mystery is, how on earth did they get those 50-ton blocks in there? Because the space is incredibly limited and tight. It's an almost impossible thing to do. As you can see, I can hardly move around in that space, and yet they managed to lay a dozen 50-ton blocks perfectly in place there. And of course, Giza has its Sphinx, its wonderful Great Sphinx. I and my colleagues are pretty confident that the Great Sphinx is more than 12,000 years old, that it began life as a lion, entirely a lion, with a lion head, and that later that head was cut down. Perhaps it was already very heavily eroded and damaged. It was cut down and put into the shape of wearing a classic Nemes headdress, where the lion's mane would have been. Egyptologists argue that it represents the pharaoh Khafra, whose pyramid stands behind it. I think that's absolute nonsense. It doesn't look anything like Khafra at all. Not sure who it represents, but I think it's a reworking of a leonine head. And again, the Sphinx plays games with the sun. And middle photograph, If you get up illegally on the back of the Great Sphinx, that is what you see. You see the back of the Sphinx's head. But if you do the same thing at dawn on the spring equinox, which is the 21st of March, spring equinox in the northern hemisphere, you will see that the Sphinx is gazing directly at the rising sun. And the Sphinx always gazes directly at the rising sun on the spring equinox. On the summer solstice, the sun is far to the left. On the winter solstice, it's far to the right. But on the spring equinox, the Sphinx is gazing directly at it. And what changes, and I'm going to go into this tomorrow, is the constellation that lies behind the sun, the constellation that houses the sun, which defines the character of the world age. That's what changes through time. But the gaze on the sun at dawn on the spring equinox never changes. The Sphinx is oriented perfectly due east, and that's where the sun rises on the equinox. And this aerial photograph gives I think, a sense of the antiquity and the mystery of the place. The Great Sphinx, of course, is hewn entirely out of solid bedrock. Don't be deceived by the blocks that you see all over it. Those are all restoration blocks. And in fact, some of those restoration blocks were being put on the body of the Sphinx during the Old Kingdom, during the time of Khafra, the supposed creator of the Sphinx. Now, why would he be restoring a brand new monument? Makes more sense that he was restoring a very old monument. In front of it are two megalithic temples, directly in front of the Sphinx, so-called Sphinx Temple, and to the left, as we look at the screen, the so-called Vali Temple. These megalithic temples include blocks that weigh, in some cases, well over 100 tons. They are quite extraordinary, and I believe that they belong to the same epoch as the Sphinx, that they go back 12,000 years or more. And I'll give more detail on that as well. So just a quick look at the Giza Plateau and the magic of the place and the way that it unites heaven and earth, as above, so below. Here's the sun setting over the pyramid of Menkaura. Just look at the way it rolls down the side of that pyramid and gradually descends into the earth. There's magic at work at Giza, sorcery, beautiful, beautiful magic. In front of the pyramids is the village of Nazlet al-Saman. It used to be the case, I don't know whether the Egyptian authorities have got it under control now, but it used to be the case that you could just hear the sounds of picks and shovels every night in Nazlet al-Saman as people were excavating underneath their homes. Because, of course, there's a huge amount of stuff underneath there that belonged to the Pyramid Age. And this view, we're seeing the Nile Valley to the left as I look at the screen, and the three great pyramids of Giza in the desert overlooking the valley of the Nile. More aerial views. On the left, we're south looking north, and on the right, we're north looking south. The entrances to all the pyramids are in their northern faces. And there's the Great Pyramid in the foreground, the second pyramid, the third pyramid, and the entrance to the Great Pyramid. Now, actually, what we're looking at there is called that entrance, that hole in the front of the Great Pyramid, is called Mamun's Hole, because the Caliph al-Mamun, at that time, the Great Pyramid still had its facing stones, and he didn't know how to get into it. There was actually a secret button you could press, which would move one of those blocks aside and give access to the entrance. He knew that it should be in the north face, but he couldn't find it, so he just started hammering and drilling and cutting into the Great Pyramid. This was in the 9th century, with a team of guys, and they got a certain way in, and then they heard a block, something falling inside the pyramid, and they knew they were on the right track, and they cut their way into the original entrance system. So the entrance that we go through now to enter the pyramid is not the original entrance. It's Mamun's Hole. But it joins up with the internal corridor system. The Great Pyramid speaks to the earth. You know, this monument has got a footprint of 13 acres, and it is oriented within 3/60ths of a single degree to true north. That's an astonishing feat of surveying and setting out. And it tells us something else. It tells us that the pyramid is deliberately designed to speak to the earth, that it's connected to the earth, it's connected to a key aspect of the earth, not magnetic north that we see on our compasses, but true geographic north, the spin axis of the earth. And the alignment is almost perfect. And then something else, this is really quite complicated or quite simple. The pi ratio is built into the Great Pyramid. We know that what pi is the circumference of a circle divided by its diameter, and it gives us 3.14 recurring. In the case of the Great Pyramid, the ratio is 2 pi, rather like the radius of a circle, defining the circumference at the ratio of 2 pi. And this also relates to the Earth for reasons that I will explain in more detail tomorrow. But it's regarded by Egyptologists, they recognize this. You'll find this in all mainstream Egyptological texts, that the pi ratio is present in the Great Pyramid, but the Egyptological view is that it's a total coincidence, because those ancient Egyptians couldn't possibly have figured out pi. It was the Greeks who did that, according to mainstream archaeology. How dare one even suggest that the ancient Egyptians had preceded the Greeks in discovering pi? Of course they had. Back to the Great Pyramid. It's an intriguing monument. It invites exploration. But if you want to climb it, you've got to deal with the local police, because it's illegal to climb the pyramid and very difficult to get permission to do that. Okay, here's a confession. I've climbed the Great Pyramid 5 times. Twice illegally, 3 times legally, with special permission, which I'll never get again. But there was a time when I was able to get that permission. And if you want to climb the Great Pyramid, this is the corner you need to go up, which is the southwestern corner. You really don't want to make the mistake of trying to climb up the middle of one of the faces, because you're going to get lost. You really are. It's a very, very bad mistake. But there's a lovely, perfect line up the southwest corner, and if you follow that, you won't go far wrong in getting to the summit. I'll just read out some of the statistics. Its original height was 481.39 feet, 13.1 acre footprint, 6 million tons in weight, 2.3 million blocks of stone. Those lost casing stones, there were 115,000 of them. They weighed about 10 tons each, and they covered an area of 22 acres. The angle of slope of the Great Pyramid is 52 degrees. All of the internal corridors of the Great Pyramid slope at 26 degrees. Do the math, it's half. The slope of the corridors is half of the slope of the pyramid. Now, at this point, I'm going to ask my colleagues back there, and if you will bear with me, to play a video. It's only about 4 or 5 minutes. This was a climb that Santha and I and our great friend Robert Boval made in 1996. And we shot it on a very old-fashioned video camera, using tape, and I apologize for the quality, but I just want to give you some feeling of what it's like to climb the last surviving wonder of the ancient world. So I'm going to just stand aside, and hopefully the video will start to play by some technical magic. There we go. Always check your footing before you
go. Even after what we've done 10 courses, look at this.
10 courses is already exhausting.
Hey Graham, this is the life.
This is the life, you're not kidding. It's exhilarating. It's a wonderful feeling of being in the right place at the right time.
Well, this is the right time. The equinox, I tell you.
Kidding.
And it's funny.
You okay? We shouldn't waste too much time going up because we may get an awkward guard at some point.
Hello, dude.
Careful with that bag on your back, it's catching on the rock.
How about one of you and me, kind of sitting and looking at this pyramid?
Well, we'll do it from the top.
The top would be good.
From the top, it's really nice.
Well, it's a photographer's paradise, huh?
Yeah, it's wonderful.
The second pyramid is a beautiful, beautiful, wonderful monument. It really is.
Can we go up, Ray, so we can have some gold light?
Yeah, let's get going. We don't want to waste this wonderful
You know that we're watching it from approximately half a kilometer away, eh?
Yeah.
Come on. Okay, let's carry on with the climb.
Let's get up now. Nearly there.
Oh, wow. It's a wonderful shot. Okay, here's the summit, huh?
Almost.
It is.
Another 20, 30 feet and we'll be there. None of the Greek monuments compare in even a tiny fraction with the monuments of Egypt. They're pitiful by comparison.
Okay, here we are.
Although I must say the Parthenon is very beautiful.
But it's funny, I'm not that inspired by the classical.
No. Well, you can see that they copied Karnak anyway. Full causeway quite well from here, Robert. Don't fall off, huh?
Oh. There you are.
Look where you're going.
Second pyramid. And we pan down.
You can even see the edge of Menkaura from here. Yeah, it's definitely.
That's the Great Sphinx, of course, that Robert's focusing in on there.
Well, here we are. Day of the spring equinox. On top of the Great Pyramid. Where else?
Where else to be on that day?
I mean, where else?
Hi.
You look pretty sphinx-like yourself, actually. Praise to Ra.
Anyway, just a short notion of what it's like to climb that amazing place. Thank you. That was 25 years ago. I have to be honest, I couldn't do it today. I don't have the strength or the agility anymore. It's amazing what 25 years will take away from your life. But the pyramids never change. So there I am at the top of the Great Pyramid. And I have a curious little story to tell. As you can see, there's a great deal of graffiti on top of the Great Pyramid. Actually, the famous map maker Mercator climbed it in the 16th century, and he left his graffiti up there. And on one of our climbs, Santha and I found the name of my grandfather. He was called Philip Hancock, and there it was, P. Hancock. And I couldn't be sure, of course, that it was the right P. Hancock. But when we got back home, I was able to check his diaries. He had these little diaries about that high. I was able to check his diaries, and in one of them in 1916, I believe it was the 5th of April 1916, he just wrote, "Climbed Great Pyramid today." Now, we have not been able to relocate Santha's photographs of my grandfather's graffiti, which actually, I'm going to show you closer up, is here. But fortunately, the Dash Foundation have done a high-definition survey of the whole of the pyramid. And I contacted Rebecca Dash, and it turned out she had a photograph of the exact spot. And on the left, you can see the arrow pointing at it, and on the right, you can see very clearly P. Hancock, my granddad. And there he is. And that's his autobiography, which was never published. And in the first paragraph, just in 3 lines, he notes that he climbed the Great Pyramid. And the view was amazing, but it was mainly desert. He was a fire and brimstone preacher, my granddad. And I think sometimes his Christian views got in the way of his appreciation of the antiquities, but he was a great traveler. In fact, my dad was born in Iran, Persia, as it was then. My granddad went there to try to convert the Persians to Christianity. After 8 years, he only had a single success, and that was his cook. So there's the diagram of the pyramid, and I'm going to start at the bottom in the subterranean chamber, which lies about 100 feet vertically beneath the base of the Great Pyramid, and close to 600 feet vertically beneath the apex of the Great Pyramid. I think the subterranean chamber is the original structure on this site. I think it was sacred for thousands and thousands of years. I think it goes back to more than 12,000 years ago, and I think the pyramid was built on top of it because it's there. This is what the subterranean chamber looks like. It's hewn out of solid bedrock. It seems unfinished, and the theory of Egyptologists is that it was supposed to be the tomb of Khufu, the supposed builder of the Great Pyramid, but having cut down a 300-foot-long vertical corridor sloping at 26 degrees out of bedrock and got there and cut this down, they just decided at the last moment it wasn't quite satisfactory, so they abandoned it and decided to bury him elsewhere in the Great Pyramid. That doesn't make any sense to me at all, absolutely 0 sense. To give you scale, I'm there with Robert Boval, and we're inside the subterranean chamber. Those 2 curious fins of rock are very interesting. One of the things, we once had an experience of being in the Great Pyramid with an opera singer, and she sang up in the king's chamber hundreds of feet above us, and we down there in the subterranean chamber could hear her crystal clear. The Great Pyramid plays with sound in an almost magical way. So that is that descending corridor that goes down to the subterranean chamber, 3 feet 5 inches high, 3 feet 5 inches wide, cut out of solid bedrock. But of course, once you've been in the subterranean chamber, you've got to go up it again. And you're going to go out of the subterranean chamber, up to here, and then you're going to join what's called the ascending corridor, and then you're going to come into the Grand Gallery, into the base of the Grand Gallery. And there you have an option. You can carry on up at 26 degrees, or you can go horizontally into the so-called Queen's Chamber. And that's the Queen's Chamber. That's a view of the Queen's Chamber. I'm there with John Anthony West, the late, great, amazing, remarkable, brilliant, iconoclastic, wonderful human being, John Anthony West. We will never see his like again. Some dimensions on the Queen's Chamber. See that little hole in the wall there? If you went there in 1871, you wouldn't have seen that hole in the wall. The walls were completely closed off. But there are holes in the walls in the King's Chamber further up, and a British Freemason called John Wayneman Dixon wondered if the same system applied in the Queen's Chamber and if maybe they'd covered it up when they finished the work. So he went around with a little hammer tapping on the walls, and lo and behold, he found two hollow points, one on the south side, that's this one on the north side. And he cut it away, and it revealed this so-called air shaft. Well, it's not an air shaft because it doesn't exit on the outside of the pyramids. The ones in the King's Chamber do, but the ones in the Queen's Chamber don't. There's one in the south wall, one in the north wall. And these shafts have been explored with robot cameras. This is the doorway in the southern shaft. And of course, having found a doorway, it would be intriguing to know what lay beyond it. So technology was wheeled in, and a hole was drilled in the doorway. What did they discover? They discovered a gap and then another door. They couldn't get through that. Its secrets remain closed. The northern shaft also has a similar doorway with these curious metal handles. There's the Grand Gallery. We continue up. This amazing Corbel vault takes us right up towards the King's Chamber. And here is the King's Chamber. I've put the dimensions there. I don't think I need to read them out. And there's that empty sarcophagus on the western side of the King's Chamber, and there's one of those air shafts. And in this case, it does exit on the outside of the pyramid, as was proved in the 19th century when explorers rolled cannonballs down them and they turned up inside the King's Chamber. At the top of the Grand Gallery, look at the diagram. There's the Grand Gallery on the left here. That's the top of the Grand Gallery. Then there's this little antechamber, and then you come into the King's Chamber. And then above it, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 further chambers, which the Egyptologists call relieving chambers. The theory is that they're to relieve the pressure of the monument on the King's Chamber so that it wouldn't collapse the King's Chamber. This, of course, is complete nonsense because there are no such relieving chambers above the Queen's Chamber, and the Queen's Chamber bears much more weight than the King's Chamber does, being far lower in the body of the pyramid. Whatever they are not there to relieve stress. They are astonishing megalithic constructions. Those blocks of stone in the foreground weigh 70 tons each. They're granite. And they're on every one of those floors is floored with these gigantic granite blocks. There we were making a film. That's my daughter, Layla, who's now given us 2 grandchildren. Much younger, of course, at that time. We were making a film and we got up into the upper part of the relieving chambers. You can just get a sense of the scale there. Now, Egyptologists say, there's no problem moving 70-ton blocks of stone. The Egyptians did it by making the sand wet or putting some kind of oil, and they just dragged the blocks along the sand. Maybe, but that doesn't explain how you get them hundreds of feet in the air and use them in construction in the center of the Great Pyramid. It just doesn't make any sense to me at all. What is the evidence that Khufu built the Great Pyramid? It boils down really to this single cartouche here, which is Khufu's cartouche, and it's in that relieving chamber that I showed you the pictures of. Supposedly a quarry mark put on the block when the workers were quarrying out the blocks, and it ended up in the chambers above the king's chamber. There's a very strong case that it's a forgery put there by Howard Vyse, who opened that place with dynamite back in the 19th century. I can't absolutely swear to you that it's a forgery because I wasn't there in the 19th century, but I think the evidence stacks up that it was. And that this was not a tomb. What we're seeing at the bottom of the frame is the only surviving statue of Khufu, the supposed builder of the Great Pyramid. That statue is less than 2 inches tall. This was not a man with a gigantic ego who needed to build a gigantic pyramid for his tomb. Seems to me he could care less about ego. What those relieving chambers do look like is the so-called Jed pillar, which represented the backbone of Osiris, and they're a symbol of the resurrection of Osiris, who of course was the high deity of ancient Egypt. Now, this is a pyramid as well, although it doesn't really look like one. This is the pyramid of Unas, who was the first pharaoh of the 5th dynasty. In other words, this pyramid was built about 150 years, if the Orthodox chronology is correct, about 150 years after the Great Pyramid was built. 150 years. Now, normally, we expect as time goes by that people get better at stuff, not worse at stuff. You know, you build the Great Pyramid and then 100 years later, this is all you can do? What's that? It's certainly not progress. Or is it possible that the whole dating scheme is messed up and wrong? There's something wonderful inside the Pyramid of Unas, though, and inside all of the 5th dynasty pyramids. I used to think that Santha did this deliberately. I thought she'd done this as a deliberate double exposure. But we had a conversation about it recently, and she told me with that camera she didn't do double exposure. She didn't even know how to do double exposures with that camera. This was an accidental double exposure. And it's really amazing because in the background you see the Great Pyramid, and in the foreground you see the tomb chamber of the Pyramid of Unas with the pyramid text written on the side of it. And those texts really do help us to understand what the pyramids are about. So it's a kind of magical thing that this image is combined in one frame. Magical to me, at any rate. They're all about Osiris, joining Osiris in the heavens, the story of Osiris. Osiris was the king in the legendary first time. And we're told that he was murdered by his adversary Set and 72 conspirators. That number 72 will turn out to be highly significant, as I'll explain tomorrow. And that his body was hacked into pieces and then reassembled and revivified through the magic powers of Isis so that she might conceive the divine child Horus. Bear with me while I read you a few lines here and there. I have to change my glasses to do this. But I just want to, This is from Normandy Ellis's superb translation of the ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead, which is a direct part of the direct legacy of the pyramid texts. And she's addressing herself to this scene here. Hail Thoth, architect of truth. Give me words of power that I may create myself from my dreams of becoming. I stand before the masters who witnessed the transformation of the body of a man into the body and spirit, who were witnesses to resurrection, when the corpse of Osiris entered the mountain, and the soul of Osiris walked out shining. He gathered his thigh, his heel, and his leg. He gathered his arms and backbones. He gathered the dreams crackling inside the dark cave of his skull. He knitted himself together in secret. He came forth from death, a shining thing, his face white with heat. A lot of people say that the ancient Egyptians were morbidly focused on death. Far from it. They were intensely focused on life and how we should live our lives in order to have a good death. And this is the scene of the copulation of Isis and Osiris. Isis takes the form of a bird, sometimes a hawk, sometimes a swallow. And again, I want to read you from Normandy's translation. I stand before the masters who witnessed the working of magic, who were with Isis the evening she became the swallow, and her lamentations filled the air, who were with her as she shook down her black hair and veiled the god's transformation in secret, who witnessed the conception of the divine child, though his coming was yet unrevealed. That divine child is the god Horus, who we've all heard of. There are more scenes, many of them you will find in the temples of Egypt, of this act of union between Isis and Osiris, giving birth ultimately to the god Horus. And there we see in the temple of Seti I, Horus performing the rituals, engendering the resurrection in the heavens of his father Osiris. And on the right of the picture on the left is Seti I offering incense to Osiris. I love this image here. Has particular significance to me for a reason I'll explain in another talk. This is Osiris. I mean, this is the most unnatural position to be in. This is Osiris, the spirit of Osiris rising up into the heavens. Horus comes to you, O king, that he may do for you what he did for his father Osiris, so that you may live as those in the sky live, that you may be more extant than those who exist on earth. Raise yourself because of your strength. May you ascend to the sky. May the sky give birth to you like Orion. May you have power in your body, and may you protect yourself from your foe. That's from the pyramid texts. So scholars do agree that Osiris was identified by the ancient Egyptians with the constellation of Orion. There's no dispute or disagreement about that. That Orion was viewed as the sort of celestial figure of Osiris in the sky, ruling over the celestial afterlife kingdom that they called the Duat, the place where our souls go to after death. And it was envisaged as being located in the sky between the constellations of Leo and Orion, with the great heavenly river of the Milky Way running through the middle of the Duat. And again, I'm going to explain the exact details of the timing of this to you tomorrow, but to me, the whole vast scheme looks like a device to transform men into gods, companions of Orion who navigate the Duat with Osiris. And since Osiris was said to have ruled in the first time in the remote past, perhaps we shouldn't be surprised that the astronomical layout of the site hints at extremely ancient origins. Back to that tomb chamber, the pyramid of Unas. The frame on the right, you'll see that oval cartouche, and in it, there's a rabbit at the top of it. That's the name of Unas. But also in it are many, many stars. Stars appear everywhere in these tomb chambers and in the pyramid texts. A couple of quick extracts. O king, you are this I'm not claiming that these are extracts of what we're actually looking at here. They're general extracts from the pyramid texts. O king, you are this great star, the companion of Orion, who traverses the sky with Orion. You ascend from the east of the sky, being renewed in your due season and rejuvenated in your due time. The gods who are in the sky are brought to you. The gods who are on earth assemble for you. They place their hands under you. They make a ladder for you. that you may ascend on it into the sky. The doors of the sky are thrown open to you. The doors of the starry firmament are thrown open for you. The king is a flame, moving before the wind to the end of the sky and to the end of the earth. The king travels the air and traverses the earth. There is brought to him a way of ascent to the sky. O my Father, great King, the aperture of the sky window is opened for you. The door of the sky and the horizon opens to you. So the pyramid texts are just the earliest of the funerary texts of ancient Egypt. They go through the coffin texts were next, written inside coffins. The Book of the Dead, typically written on papyrus scrolls and placed with the body of the deceased. And the book of what is in the duat on the left there. The book of what is in the duat is a kind of Baedeker to the underworld journey that the soul will make after life, so that we shouldn't be too surprised by what we confront upon that journey. And they did believe that we would make a journey through this afterlife realm that they called the duat, and that we would confront riddles and challenges there. We'd be faced with the truth, the absolute, clear, unvarnished truth of our own lives. We would have to confront that. And it was a kind of parallel universe. It was an underworld, and it was also in the sky. And the psychopomp, Anubis, the guide of souls, would lead the soul on this journey through the duat. These images are also from the tomb of Seti I. And notice what Seti is holding in his left hand. He's holding Ankh, the symbol of immortal life. The ancient texts leave us in no doubt that some great secret lies concealed in the fifth division of the duat, which is referred to in the text as the land of Sokar and also as Rostau. And I don't think it's an accident that one of the ancient names of Giza was Rostau. I have passed over the paths of Rostau, whether on water or on land, and these are the paths of Osiris. They are also in the limit of the sky. I am Osiris. I have come to Rostau to know the secrets of the duat. I shall not be turned back at the gates of the duat. I ascend to the sky with Orion. Looking at the Giza Plateau, you can get a sense of an underworld beneath it. Something hidden, something obscured, something deep and dark that lies beneath these amazing structures. But also a connection to the sky, as above, so below. And I just want to bounce this off you, that as you look around those chambers and corridors and passageways in the Great Pyramid, how similar they are to the depictions of the duat, of this afterlife realm that we went to. So there's the subterranean chamber, and there's an image of one of the chambers in the duat. That's from the tomb of Moses III, that image. And then, again, this is the duat in the central frame. And look at those corridors and passageways and a gallery there, just like the Grand Gallery. And there are boats in the duat, just as there's a boat that was buried right beside the Great Pyramid. They were used as part of the journey through the duat. Were they creating a three-dimensional model of the duat in the Great Pyramid? Was it an ordeal that was meant to be undergone in total darkness? Was the individual closed up in the pyramid and made to overcome his or her fears and grapple with these corridors and passageways in total darkness? I'm beginning to think that was the case. And then we come, of course, to the king's chamber, so-called. What was this all about? There's a scene in the afterlife journey called the judgment scene. This is from Deir al-Medina, this particular panel. You can find it all over Egypt. This is from Deir al-Medina in Upper Egypt. And what we see on the left is the soul of the deceased entering a chamber. And he's being ushered in by the goddess Maat. Maat wears on her headdress a feather. That's her symbol. It's the feather of truth and justice and cosmic harmony. And this is the hall of Maat, into which the deceased is being entered. To the right, we can see a set of scales. And above those scales, we can see a number of little seated figures. There are actually 42 of them, and they are the so-called negative assessors in the Duat. They will ask you questions. Ideally, you should be able to answer no to all of them. They include the 10 Commandments. Did you kill? You really should be able to say, no, I didn't. Did you steal? You should really be able to say, no, I didn't. There's clearly a moral element in this judgment. Hail Thoth, architect of truth, give me words of power that I may tell the truth of my own becoming. I stand before the masters who witness the judgment of souls, who sniff out the misdeeds, the imperfections, the lies and the half-truths we tell ourselves in the dark. Let's come to those next part of the scene. Osiris is sitting in judgment at the far right. In front of him, the lotus flower with the 4 sons of Horus sitting on top of it. And then beyond that, this rather fearsome creature here is Amit, the eater of the dead. And here is Thoth, the god of wisdom, the supposed inventor of writing in the ancient Egyptian story. And what I like about the image on the right, which is from the tombs of the nobles on the West Bank at Luxor, is that it really boils it down to a very simple thing. When the moment of death comes, you should have lived a life that allows you to look yourself straight in the face, without shame and without regret. There's the scales. In one pan, this curious little object here represents the heart, a symbol for the soul of the deceased. What's contained in the other pan is the feather of Maat. You do not want your heart to be heavy in the scales against the feather of truth and justice and cosmic harmony. You want it to balance out. And if it does not balance out, you will confront Amit, the eater of the dead. It was possible. The ancient Egyptians understood human frailty. They understood that we all make mistakes. We're not meant to be complete moral paragons all our lives. Part of the process of life is to make mistakes. But if we make mistakes, we should learn from them and try to do better the next time. If we've harmed others, we should try not to harm others again. And there was always forgiveness for those who learned from their mistakes and made things better. But there were some who lived lives of such wickedness, such cruelty, such greed, that there could be no forgiveness for them. And they were the ones who were consumed by Amit. No rebirth for them, no ascent to the stars. Their story is over. That's how the ancient Egyptians portrayed it. But if you're justified in the judgment, we come to this. That's where John West got the title of his wonderful book, Serpent in the Sky, from. The soul flying up to the stars. I want to read you a little bit more from Normandy's amazing texts. Bear with me while I find the right passage. Again, this is Normandy Ellis's translation of the ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead. It's called Awakening Osiris. I urge everybody who doesn't have it to get hold of that book. Hail Thoth, architect of truth, give me words of power that I may write the story of my own becoming. I stand before the masters who witnessed the creation, who were with Ra that morning the sun rolled into being, who were with Osiris in the grave as he gathered himself together and burst from the tomb white with heat, a light and shining God. Hail Thoth, architect of truth, give me words of power that I may form the characters of my own evolution. I stand before the masters who witnessed the Genesis, who were the authors of their own forms, who rolled into being, who walked the dark, circuitous passages of their own becoming, who saw with their own eyes their destinies and the shapes of things to come. Hail Thoth, architect of truth, give me words of power that when I speak the life of a man, I may give his story meaning. I stand before the masters who know the histories of the dead, who decide which tales to hear again, who judge the books of lives as either full or empty, who are themselves authors of truth. And they are Isis and Osiris, the divine intelligences. And when the story is written, and the end is good, and the soul of a man is perfected, with a shout, they lift him into heaven. I said that moral behavior is part of the judgment scene, and certainly it is. But what's fundamentally at stake here, the question that is being asked is, you were given the precious gift of life in a human body. What did you do with it? Did you use it well, or did you waste it? The whole Egyptian effort was not a morbid focus on death. It was a focus on how we should live our lives so as not to waste this precious gift that we've been given. And I'm afraid we live in a civilization today that is designed to waste the gift of life in every possible way, to persuade us that all we're here for is to buy stuff and consume stuff and eat stuff and honor ourselves by the stuff we have. All of it trivial and meaningless and passing and wiped away by time. What matters about life is forgotten in our civilization. We have much to learn from the ancient Egyptians. This is the ancient Egyptian tree of life. This is from the temple of Karnak. There is Thoth, and there is Pharaoh Seti I kneeling in the foreground. And Thoth is writing the name of Seti I on the ancient Egyptian tree of life. There's the goddess Isis feeding Ankh, immortal life, to Pharaoh Seti I. And this is part of an ancient spiritual system that celebrated and nurtured the gift of life and sought immortal life, but did not take it for granted. Immortal life had to be earned. It wasn't something that you just got, that you were entitled to. This is more images of the Duat from the tomb of Seti I. And this is the tomb chamber of Seti I. And again, the emphasis on stars is very, very clear. They're everywhere in these tomb chambers. And here are the souls of Pe and Nekhen. And there are hints of a secret brotherhood, passing down knowledge from the remote past to the future. This is from the second shrine of Tutankhamun. And I'd like you to pay attention to what's going on here. This individual is connected through the third eye to a star in the sky. This focus on the stars, on the heavens, runs through and through the ancient Egyptian system. And here they're looking at celestial orbs, the sun or the moon. And in this scene, what you're looking at on the left of the scene is Osiris Orion in his boat of stars. And he's holding the Ankh. And he's sending out his emissaries, the so-called followers of Horus. And their mission is to maintain the Osirian system on earth, just as Osiris maintains it in the heavens. And the purpose of the system is to perfect the immortal soul of the initiate. Now, in the last moments, let's just jump over to the other side of the world, and I'll be going into this in much more detail tomorrow. let's jump over to Mexico. And there in Mexico, we find the incredible pyramid city of Teotihuacan. And archaeologists are absolutely adamant that there was no connection between ancient Egypt and the ancient Americas. I'm doubtful about that. Probably many of us are aware that cocaine and tobacco were found in a number of ancient Egyptian burials. They're both New World plants. How did they get to Egypt if there was no contact between ancient Egypt and ancient Mexico? But I think ancient Egypt and ancient Mexico share something else. I think they share a legacy from a much older time. And virtually identical spiritual system that you find in ancient Egypt, you also find in Mexico. And it's aimed at the perfection of the soul, just as it was in ancient Egypt. And this site is particularly significant in that respect. Of course, the first shot Santa took from a helicopter. This second shot is from Cerro Gordo, one of the mountains that overlooks Teotihuacan. Here in the foreground is the so-called Pyramid of the Moon, and there's the Pyramid of the Sun, and this little pyramid over here is the Pyramid of Quetzalcoatl, who is a figure that will become important in a talk I'm going to give tomorrow. And there's an avenue to get a sense of it, a diagram, the Pyramid of the Moon. It's called the Avenue of the Dead, the Way of the Dead that runs through these pyramids. The citadel with the Temple of Quetzalcoatl in it, and the Pyramid of the Sun. Another aerial view. There's the Pyramid of the Moon. Here are a group of Mexican tourists enjoying the view from the Pyramid of the Moon, looking down the Way of the Dead. And a few shots here of the Pyramid of the Sun. I'll have more to say about that tomorrow too, and how it plays with the sun just as the Giza pyramids do. Almost looks like a star once you look down on it straight from above. It's about half the height of the Great Pyramid, but it's a marvelous, wonderful structure. So a closer view, near us the Pyramid of the Moon, with the Way of the Dead running from it, then the Pyramid of the Sun, and in the distance, much smaller, the Pyramid of Quetzalcoatl. And let's go closer to the Pyramid of Quetzalcoatl. Quetzalcoatl was typified as the plumed or feathered serpent. And you can see that feathered serpent here, 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 here. This is an image of Quetzalcoatl. He was a god, but also a human being. And he was remembered in Mexico as the bringer of civilization after a time of cataclysm. A civilizing hero who taught the basis of civilization in a devastated and ruined world. We live in the fifth age of the world, according to the ancient Mexican traditions, the fifth sun. And according to those traditions, the fourth age of the world, the fourth age, the fourth sun, ended very badly. It ended in a catastrophic flood. This was followed by a long period of darkness, during which the sun vanished from the sky and the air was filled with darkness, and it was very cold. And then, even though it was night, even though it was not day, even though there was no light, they gathered, the gods convened there in Teotihuacan. Two of them competed for the honor to sacrifice themselves in the sacred fire in order to bring the fifth sun to life. One of them was very boastful and proud, but he chickened out at the last minute. The other was the humble, pockmarked, bubonic god Nanahuatzin. He rushed forward and cast himself into the fire. And the gods waited for a long time, but then eventually the sky started to glow red, and as it does at dawn, and the sun appeared, and it took sight from the eyes, it shone and threw out rays splendidly, and its rays spilt everywhere. And it's at this moment of rebirth, after a great cataclysm, that Quetzalcoatl manifests. And his mission is with humanity of the fifth age, of our age. And he took the form of a human being. And he's always described as bearded. And he's selected as his emblem the plumed or feathered serpent. At Teotihuacan, they had just the focus on the stars that the ancient Egyptians did. This is a stellar image from Teotihuacan. The rays emanating from that star remind me so much of the rays emanating from the star in that scene from the second shrine of Tutankhamun. And Teotihuacan actually means the place where men became gods. It was so known because the lords therein buried after their deaths did not perish, but turned into gods. And it was additionally known as the place of those who had the road of the gods, and the place where gods were made. In ancient Egypt, the pyramid texts leave us in no doubt about the ultimate objectives of the rituals. And it was to throw open the doors of the firmament and to make a road so that the deceased might ascend into the company of the gods. I think that ancient Egypt and ancient Mexico both inherited a common legacy of spiritual beliefs from a remote, ancestral, lost civilization. I think we are a species with amnesia. It's a funny thing because I used that phrase first in Fingerprints of the Gods. And there's some guy who published a book Fingerprints of the Gods was published in 1995. There's some guy who published a book in 2015 called A Species with Amnesia. He's actually accusing me of stealing his title. Anyway, it's on the record, it's in my book, Fingerprints of the Gods, and actually it's neither of us, because the concept actually comes from Immanuel Velikovsky, Mankind in Amnesia. I just slightly altered it and talked about a species with amnesia. Are we a species with amnesia? Have we forgotten an incredibly important episode in our own story? Imagine in the life of a human being if there were some incredibly important formative episode in your life that through some process of amnesia you'd entirely forgotten. Wouldn't you be disoriented and confused? Wouldn't things puzzle you that somehow rang a bell but didn't quite make sense? I think it's the same today. I think we are a species with amnesia. I think we've forgotten a very important part of our own heritage, and I've made it, I guess, my mission for the past more than 25 years to try to recover what I can of that heritage. I'm not alone. There are a number of other people working in this field who I regard as close friends and colleagues. We all feel that there's something wrong with the way that history is taught, that we need to recover that lost episode. And that if we do recover it, perhaps there will be some hope for our own civilization in the future. For me, this is a serious mission and a serious task. It's not a joke. I've devoted my life to it. And I will explain why in more detail tomorrow. I'm ending a little early, but I'd be delighted to take 15 minutes of questions if anybody would like to take that opportunity now. I know we have sessions for questions and answer, but I'd be happy if anybody wants to ask a question. Go ahead.
So, if we started to be aware of what was forgotten,
Yeah.
and we wanted to join in that mission, what would you recommend for us? If we wanted to join you in that mission and have a collective journey together.
Well, there's a number of issues here. Firstly, I recommend for each individual who's interested in this to take your own path, to find what you can, to explore the mysteries of the past and see what doesn't fit and what doesn't make sense. But secondly, to understand that in the institution of archaeology, we no longer have an honest discipline. We have a power structure which is imposing itself upon the past, which claims to be the sole authority to interpret the past, which is incredibly hierarchical and elitist, which denies that any ordinary person who's not an archaeologist could bring anything to the table at all. I resist that notion. I'm an ordinary person. I'm not an archaeologist. I don't claim to be an archaeologist. I don't even want to be an archaeologist. But I want to apply my intelligence, my curiosity, and my legwork to trying to understand the past better. And that's what I would recommend anybody who's interested in this to do, is make your own journey. I suspect you'll find it begins to lead to the same place, that there's something missing, and we begin to get the profile of what that missing thing is and bring it back into life again. And let's not let archaeology get away with dominating and controlling the past. Archaeologists do some wonderful work. I have a lot of respect for archaeologists, but what I don't have respect for is the notion that they are 100% right. And anybody who's not an archaeologist doesn't have a right even to speak about it. If you look me up on Wikipedia, you'll find that I'm immediately, in the first line, described as a pseudoscientist, a purveyor of pseudoscientific theories. What a lazy way to dismiss another person's argument, just to name them, just to label them as something. Look, I don't even claim to be a scientist. What I normally say is that I'm no more of a pseudoscientist than a dolphin is a pseudo-fish. You know, a dolphin looks a bit like a fish. It swims in the same waters as a fish, but it sure as hell ain't a fish. It's a mammal. And I swim in some of the waters of archaeologists, and I may look a bit like an archaeologist in some way, but I'm not an archaeologist. I'm trying to bring other skills, the skills of a layman, with curiosity and drive to investigate the past. So that's what I would encourage everyone else to do, and resist the dead hand of archaeology and any institution that claims to know how we should think. We all have these big brains. Let's use them. Yes?
Have you ever heard of the pyramids being used with like a technique called electroculturing and magnetic fertilization? Electroculturing and magnetic fertilization.
And magnetic fertilization sounds intriguing, but I haven't heard of it.
The pyramids were used to channel energy to increase the resonance of the electromagnetic field in the soils, particularly 18 inches below the soil, to increase farm yields 50 to 100%.
To increase farm yields. You know, I'm open to many possibilities regarding the pyramids. One thing I'm sure of is that they were used in connection with this focus on life and death and how life should be lived. They were part of a process of preparation. I'm sure of that, but it doesn't stop them being other things as well. You don't go to all that effort for just one reason. There might be many reasons to make it. So I am very, very open to the idea that the pyramids had other uses and other purposes. And these are energetically incredibly powerful places. And you know, in modern civilization, we've been taught to just kind of ignore those esoteric energies, but they're very real. Magnetism is one of them, you know, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if there are other functions and other roles in these amazingly scientific and precise and remarkable monuments. The one thing I don't believe, however, this isn't really to do with your question, but I'll take the opportunity to say this. I don't need aliens to explain the pyramids. One or two more questions, yes?
I was going to say, as you started to talk about Mexico and North America, Central America, I live in El Salvador half the time, and been reading a little bit of the Popol Vuh. Yeah, and I was noticing some similarities with the bringing together the body of the dead to, you know, recreate, and how make
I
life
agree with
again.
you. These Mayan texts have much in common with the ancient Egyptian system, and that's why I think but there are also differences. And those similarities and those differences, to my mind, are best explained by a shared legacy, which is then interpreted in different ways in different cultures. Yeah. Yes?
Mine is going to be very short.
Okay.
I know that many of your lectures, you always end up with some spark of hope that maybe our civilization is not doomed if we wake up and so on, maybe we can turn things around. At this point of your life, do you truly believe that we do have a chance?
Oh yeah, we definitely have a chance. We absolutely do. It's entirely up to us. The choice is ours. Unfortunately, there are what I can only call demonic forces at work in our civilization, which are designed to repress the human spirit, which tell us that the state must be responsible for everything we do. You know, the more the state takes responsibility for stuff, the less we become responsible for our own lives. It's a crushing and terrible situation that's going on. I'll be talking about this further in another talk, but we don't have to put up with it. We can choose as individuals, as people, as communities, we can choose a different way. It doesn't have to be doom and gloom and disaster. It's not too late. Santha and I presently have 6 grandchildren, and the 7th on the way. And when I look into the bright eyes of our grandchildren and their sharp, intelligent little minds, it's amazing, you know, how infants come into this world in some way already fully formed as personalities. Makes me believe in past lives very, very, very strongly. When I look at our grandchildren, I really do feel hope for the future. I think the younger generation has got something special, and it's going to save the world. I hope so anyway. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you very much.